The books I'm using will not be very specific to any country. Most of them are kind of global solutions, and then you have to find specificities for any region you want. I'm somewhat going to focus on India since I'm sitting in India and I have the Indian audience in mind, even though I know that there are some subscribers from outside. So I'm going to run through here on some information on Indian energy portfolios with some key indicators in the first podcast, and then some future projections in the next podcast. I just collected this information from various reports. It's not exhaustive. It's just supposed to give us a sense so that when we look at solutions, we can refer back to some of these, and then you can do the same for your specific region if that's your interest. Okay, looking at some of the Renewable Energy Ministry reports for the 2019-2020. This is showing the source-wise installed power generation capacity, which is when it's running full speed. Obviously, we have thermal being the largest with 63%, and all kinds of fossil fuel go into producing the thermal energy. We'll see the role of coal, which is always something to watch out for. And here you have nuclear at 2%. These are in megawatts. 12% is hydro and 23% is renewable. So that's a I would say larger chunk of the total power capacity compared to many other countries where the renewables make up about 10% or so of the total portfolio. The ministry also provides some information on initiatives and achievements. So solar capacity increased in the last 5.5 years. This is from 2019-2020. So 2.6 gigawatts to more than 34 gigawatts, substantial increase. World's largest renewable energy expansion program, expected to be 175 gigawatt till 2022. Obviously, there is an impact of COVID, and we will see some scenarios which account for various ways in which economy may recover from the COVID hit. Renewable energy has a share of 23.39% in the total installed generation capacity in the country. It's the 5th global position overall in installed renewable energy capacity. The tariff is reduced more than 75% using plug-and-play models. That's important. The cost of solar goes down by 75%, means there is going to be much more interest in investments, and private players are playing a big role in the installed capacity as well. This is not all owned by the government. About 19 times higher than higher solar pumps installed between 2014 and 2019, 2.25 lakh, that's 100,000, versus up to 2014, 11,626 lakhs. So that's a big jump as well. Okay, renewable energy installed capacity up 226%. Solar park scheme doubled from 20 gigawatts to 40 gigawatts. Record low solar tariff, 2.44 per unit, achieved in one particular place in Rajasthan, which is a desert with lots of solar power, solar potential. Highest ever wind capacity addition of 5.5 gigawatts in 2016 and 2017. There are many institutes and agencies across the country, like the National Institute of Solar Energy, National Institute of Wind Energy, SSS, National Institute of Renewable Energy, Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency, Solar Energy Corporation of India, Association of Renewable Energy Agencies of States. It's always critical because that gives them focused missions as well. Selected indicators for India 2000, 2010 and 2019. This should be from the International Energy Agency. Doesn't show here, sorry about that. It shows up in the next slide, I think. So here's the population growth over this time in millions. Obviously, there is a substantial increase which is expected to continue for some time. But the good news is, along with that, the GDP also has, I think, the second highest growth rate in the world, behind China. Of course, again, COVID has had a huge impact. Going with that, of course, is the energy demand. In million tons of oil equivalent. Obviously, one has to look at the energy intensity of GDP and carbon intensity of energy production, because that's where the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, and India's commitments to the Paris Agreement come in, right? So from 2000 to 2019, there is a more than double the increase in energy demand, and most of it is, as you can see, coming from coal. So this is still bad news, and it's going to take some time before India gets rid of coal. There is gas, oil, tiny amount of nuclear, biomass, which has lots of pollution problems, deforestation problems, air pollution problems, especially indoor, and so on. And that's traditional biomass versus renewable. So there is a substantial fraction of the population that still uses traditional biomass for cooking and boiling water and so on, for example, or even heating in cold places, which is not good news. The key indicators in India as a percentage of global averages, which gives a sense of where India wants to go as its ambitions for economic growth continue. GDP per capita, 2000 to 2019, there is again a substantial increase, but it's still less than 50% of the global average. Energy demand per capita is also below 50%, below 40% actually, which corresponds to energy poverty, which obviously has to be solved, which goes hand in hand with GDP per capita. If you don't have enough energy, you cannot be having a good standard of living or income. Oil demand per capita, coal demand unfortunately is high, 60% of the world, and has increased from 2000 to 2019, which is not good, of course. Residential energy use has increased, shows the growing middle class. Steel and cement use, there is a boom in growth in construction, which is an opportunity as well, because the new buildings that have not been built yet can be made energy friendly, green, and reduce energy use, etc. Car ownership increases, which shows an indication of the increased per capita GDP, but also points to need for electrification as well as for public transportation, which has to slow down the car ownership. And CO2 emissions per capita still less than 40% of the global average, but as the middle class keeps expanding and per capita and total GDP of the country keep going up, you expect that CO2 emissions per capita are going to go up. This is true for India and China both, and generally an indication of economic growth, so one has to watch out for that. The total primary energy demand in India, so primary energy is usually when it's directly something that's being supplied without any processing involved. So here you have in 2000, you can see coal again has increased in million tons oil equivalent or percentage of the total demand, so that's more than 40%, which is not good. Oil remains almost the same. It's mostly imported, so points to energy security issues. Natural gas has a little bit of an up and down, but again, depends on how much is imported and how much is produced indigenously. Traditional biomass, unfortunately, remains high, even though it's reduced over time. More and more gas is being made available, especially in rural areas, of course, also the poor in urban, peri-urban areas, and modern and other. Okay, so this is the energy demand, the primary energy demand that shows again some opportunities and challenges for reducing emissions and improving the role of renewables and increasing renewable investments as well. Percentage of households using appliances in 2019, we can look at it as urban and rural. As you can imagine, lighting now almost equally used by rural and urban regions, which is good and indicates that electricity is being made available, or solar lamps, solar lanterns, etc. are being made available. And the share of efficient appliances is not that high here, less than 70%, about 65%, which obviously can be increased greatly to reduce emissions and energy use as well. Fans, again, urban higher, a little bit less in the rural areas, but you can see that the energy efficiency of these is very, very low. TV, same, higher in urban than rural. Not many are efficient. Refrigeration, again, not very efficient. Very few in the rural area, so the transition from HFCs to the new less global warming potential coolants is coming, and India has time till, I don't know, 2035 or beyond for replacing HFCs as a developing country. Washing machines, only about 20% of the urban areas have it. Very, very few in the rural areas, and surprisingly they are almost all of them are efficient in terms of energy use and ratings. Water heaters, again efficient. Air conditioners, efficient, but the number of air conditioners is growing exponentially, as I think we will see in another chart, because as India keeps warming and income levels and per capita GDP rises, there is a huge growth in demand for air conditioners. And even though they are listed here as efficient, they're still all HFC dependent, so that is something that has to be watched out for. This is just 2 and 3 wheelers in the Indian road transport in 2019. So the stock in terms of millions, 204 million are 2 and 3 wheelers, and the rest of them are 4 wheelers, trucks, and so on. The fuel consumption, obviously, almost all comes from these 4 wheelers and other transportation vehicles, and the 2 wheelers and 3 wheelers are consuming far less, but they are more inefficient in burning, so their per ton oil, the emissions may be higher, but that has to be checked. Okay, this is the India production and trade of coal and crude oil and natural gas. I won't go much into it, but you can see that the imports are a substantial part of oil and gas and even coal. Even though a lot is produced internally, million tons of coal equivalent, and this is million barrels per day and billion cubic meters. Obviously, this corresponds to a huge dependence on imports, which is not good for energy security, which can become national security issue as well. For example, if Iran faces nuclear sanctions for its nuclear activities from the Western world, then countries like India end up paying a price for it. So these are the things we have to watch out for. Annual power sector capacity conditions, we can see here renewables, solar PV and wind show some increase, but it's not monotonic. Okay, so the power capacity shows some ups and downs, the reasons for which I'm not going to get into, but the share of wind and solar in total capacity has gone up. But if we remember the emissions gap, then we have to see whether this is on track to meet India's nationally determined contributions under Paris Agreement. So as impressive as the growth is and the investments are, the total commitment to reducing emissions and increasing percentage of renewables to total energy capacity has to be kept in mind as well. Okay, so this is just the number of clean air days in India in 2019, and you can see that while peninsular India has a significant number of clean days, there are regions in the northwest and the north and west here as well have remarkably low number of clean air days, which goes together with burning coal and other fossil fuel energy sources that are not clean. Obviously, the external cost of health is a big concern. So all the renewable investments have to come also from remembering that energy production has to account for reducing air and water quality impacts as well. This is a share in value added growth by sector and level of energy intensity. So you can see the contributions of from 1990 to 2017. Fortunately, agriculture has grown, but it's in the low energy intensity. Some industries and services are also in the low energy intensity, whereas many industries are on medium and many services are in high intensity, with some industries as well. So the overall decrease in emission intensity of the GDP, which is seen more recently, is related to these impressive low energy intensity growth in certain parts of agriculture, industry, and services. Okay, so I will leave this podcast here, which is already a 16 minutes, 17 minutes long. I will do the next podcast on what are the projections that are shown for various energy related issues over India. Okay.